Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I'm cheesing right now because I'm with a good friend, but this is a very, very serious topic that we want to talk about. And if you clicked on this title and you've been waiting for this video, you know what this is about the DMT entities and the connection between DMT, ayahuasca, magic, and aliens or UFOs, however you want to call it. And inshallah, before we get into this topic, I want to introduce a good brother, a good friend of mine, Khalil Sirin. He's been researching this topic extensively. And go ahead, brother Sirin, tell them about yourself and also tell them, for those who are new to the channel or for those who are just listening to you for the first time, why should people listen to you about this topic on TNT?
Sure, Jazakallah khair. Firstly, thank you for having me on. This is a real pleasure for me, and uh, yeah, it makes me
Thank you
really
for
happy.
being here. Thank you for being here.
Alhamdulillah, like you said, I've been researching this topic for over a decade, which is over half my life. And I mention that because these are topics that are really outlandish, really out there, and DMT, psychedelics, the psychonaut subculture takes a lot of time to understand, break down, and integrate. So, yeah, to let all of these arguments sink in, it did take some time, and it did take some time to grasp. At the end of the day, we both me and you want the audience to think for themselves. We're not here to push our view, but we're here to empower people through knowledge and knowledge from both our own paradigms, but also, from non-Islamic or non-religious figures who have come to very similar conclusions, and we'll present our findings. And we want this to be a discussion. We don't want this to be, a one-sided thing. So do let us know what you're thinking in the comments. Let us know your thoughts and questions as well, and we'll address them in perhaps a future video, inshallah. But at the end of the day, we want people to be open-minded. So if you're coming at this from a new spirituality slash psychonaut paradigm, then don't immediately dismiss what we're saying because we're seemingly attacking DMT, quote unquote. We want you to be open-minded, open-hearted. We're doing this because we genuinely want the best for people who are interested in DMT, interested in psychedelics, and we want you to learn about the reality of it and the reality of the entities behind it, because we want people to realize you can't necessarily trust entities without thinking twice. This video is really breaking down the DMT entities. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, can I even trust the experience? So before we get started, so basically there's going to be three parts. Part one is introducing DMT and introducing the effects that people have under DMT. Part two is essentially going over the studies of the DMT experiences and what people see because they've gone over thousands of people that have, you know, had these DMT experiences and they've categorized and classified it as well. And then part three is going into the nature of these entities and historically connecting it with the sightings of non-DMT entities and connecting that the DMT entities that people see when they're taking these psychedelics are very similar, if not the same, as the entities that people encounter, such as UFO abductions, elves or fairies, and so forth, that people have experienced or seen throughout history, depending on which culture they are, is going to determine whether it's a ghost or a fairy or an elf. So we're going to get into that. And then at the very end, we're going to get to a conclusion, connecting all of that together with what does this have to do with witchcraft. So before we start, I just want to show you all some definitions just for people that don't know so that we don't have to keep defining what something means. Brother, if you want to show them, if you have anything to share, or do you want to just say the definition?
sure. The first one we'll talk through is just psychedelic, so it's a word we've probably thrown around a few times, but these linguistically mean mind revealing drugs. So mind revealing hallucinogens. What does that mean? They drastically alter consciousness. So you see things when you take these drugs. You feel as if your ego has dissolved when you take these drugs. And examples are LSD, psilocybin, mushrooms, mescaline, which comes from San Pedro peyote cactus or cacti, and they can be found naturally and they can be synthesized. And these are a class of drugs that usually aren't too physically harmful, but they have many psychological effects, and some can be very devastating, and sometimes people can have blissful experiences, and that is a reality. But these are the type of drugs that DMT and ayahuasca fall under. So that's why we are mentioning that. Um, Interestingly to know, for example, ancient Egyptians used blue lily, which is a psychedelic, and there is a theory that the tree of life is an acacia tree, which is very rich in DMT. So these psychedelics have
Something
had
that cultures historically thought was the tree of life.
exactly, yeah, exactly. When I say the tree of life, I don't mean that like with a, a capital alif lam. Like it's a um, yeah, exactly as you said it. And they have had or have and do play a role in many shamanistic cultures throughout history and also to this day. So the ancient shamans have been using DMT for witchcraft and for hunting, etc., for thousands of years, and this is well documented. The next definition we'll look at is jinn. So jinn are quite literally hidden entities created from smokeless fire, as mentioned in the Quran, and they exist on the earth alongside human beings in a dimension in which they can see us, but we cannot see them. And yeah, that's in brief what jinn are, and they are mortal. They can communicate. They have
And
languages.
I hesitate to use the word dimension. I don't want to interrupt you. I hesitate to use the word dimension because we don't know, is it an alternate dimension or is it just literally right next to me, but you just can't see them, you know? So method of mechanism of action, method of action unknown. So
Yeah, I was gonna say I shouldn't mechanize it,
yeah.
by saying, for example, it's the fourth dimension because we just have no clue. But yeah, yeah, exactly. Um,
But yeah, you
the
were saying
loss,
they're different beliefs, different tribes,
yeah, they
people.
have different beliefs. They have families. It's very similar to human beings. So they have families. They live very similar lifestyles to human beings. So they eat, they drink, they sleep, they travel. Some fly, some travel on the earth, some take the form of animals. So they're very similar beings to humans. They just exist in some other place on Earth, um, which we don't know about because we can't see them. The next definition we'll look at is sihr, or magic. And magic is seeking superhuman abilities or help on a matter through these unseen entities or these unseen jinn. And it's a form of, the magician makes contact with the jinn. We'll discuss this in a lot more detail in the last section, but this is just so that people understand what this is if you've never heard of it before. And finally, we'll talk about shirk, which is to associate partners with God. So there are some qualities we as Muslims know that only belong to God, only belong to Allah, and it's a crime, and in fact, the greatest crime to attribute that to creation, what belongs to the Creator, because it goes against the main principle in Islam, which is Tawheed, which is monotheism. But yeah, those are the main definitions, and we'll now crack on with looking at what DMT is and what ayahuasca is, and the types of experience people have whilst on these drugs.
Thank you, brother. Jazakallah khair. Take it away, man.
So, Bismillah, we've defined what psychedelics are, we've defined what jinn are, we've defined what sihr is, or magic, and we've defined shirk, associating partners with God. Now we're going to look more at what DMT is and then ayahuasca. What DMT is and ayahuasca. So, DMT is an extremely powerful hallucinogenic drug found naturally within the human body, as well as in mammals and plants and nature generally. It's notorious for producing entity experiences for those who take the drug. What does this mean? Simply, it means people who take the drug often, if they take high doses, report seeing beings that exist in another world or exist in this world, but they are not usually able to perceive them. But when they take the drug, they're now able to hear them and interact with them and see them, which is entirely bizarre. But we'll look at studies on this. We'll look at specifically the John Hopkins University study conducted last year, which surveyed over 2,500 individuals about specifically the entities seen on DMT. The drug is usually a crystal or powder, and it could be extracted or synthesized, but it's usually extracted, and it can be smoked, injected, snorted, or taken in other ways, but it's usually smoked, The experience is known as the businessman's trip, as it only lasts 5 minutes. So this can seem like a very short amount of time. People think, well, 5 minutes, and that's hardly anything. Many drugs last hours and hours on end, but the those who take the drug report time dilation, i.e., 5 minutes, although it may not seem like much, feels like eternity. Because remember, we're dealing with inner subjective conscious experiences. What that means is, though it may objectively be 5 minutes, the user feels as if it's much longer. So it's a tough concept. When I said in the beginning that this was an outlandish topic, which is hard to integrate just by reading it, you can maybe, if you've never heard of this topic before, you've got a flavor of why I prefaced this discussion with that phrase. So ayahuasca now is the traditional way DMT has been used by the Amazonian shamans for thousands of years. It's an orally active brew. What does that mean? It means it's made up of two components. I mean, that's not what it means, but it is made up of two components, one containing DMT, so one plant that is rich in DMT, and another plant that is rich in MAOIs or contains MAOIs or monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Again, in simple plain English, these inhibitors just allow for the DMT to enter the body. So you drink it in a brew, and then the DMT enters the body, and the stomach enzymes don't break the DMT down, i.e., it's able to pass through and enter the bloodstream that way. And in doing so, it lasts many, many more uh, hours longer. I mean, well, the original DMT experience only lasts roughly 5 minutes, maybe less, maybe a bit more, but we're talking about in the short minutes range. With ayahuasca, we're talking hours. We're talking hours, easily 8 hours. So it's a very different experience. Entities are still encountered on ayahuasca, but there's less continuity across various experiences just because of how long it is and the nature of the different drugs within ayahuasca. Because although DMT is the main one, these MAOIs often have effects on the body even if they were taken alone. So it is a very different experience. Comparable, but extremely different. It's also interesting to know that DMT was first synthesized in the West by a Canadian chemist in the 1930s, and it was only discovered to be a hallucinogen in the Western world until the 1956. So until 1956, a Hungarian chemist extracted DMT from a DMT-rich plant and administered it to himself. But prior to this, it wasn't even a known hallucinogen. So, it was fairly recent in the last 100 years that it was discovered to be a psychedelic, but it has been used for thousands of years prior to this in the Amazonian rainforest by shamans. So, what do people see? What do people experience? This is probably what viewers who haven't heard of DMT or have only heard of it briefly are probably wondering. And we'll go through this. So we'll first look at what happens when people smoke it, and then we'll briefly look at what happens when people take ayahuasca. So when smoking, we mentioned that it lasts a short amount of time, potentially 5 minutes. After the first hit or the first toke of DMT, users start seeing reality differently. How? What does that mean? Again, it's subjective, but we'll try and explain it in a way that you'll understand. So, consciousness becomes sharper, colors jump up, things brighten. Many report a sense of clarity compared to base reality. And again, what does that mean? That's a really difficult concept to grasp. How can something feel more real or more clear than real? The only example that I can give that might make sense is like the like that of sleep and waking life. When you're asleep in a dream, you may think it's real. You may perceive the dream reality to be real whilst you're in the dream. But once you wake up, you realize, oh, that was a dream. How could I be so foolish? How could I not have noticed that that event was so impossible that couldn't have been real? Or how couldn't have I noticed that that didn't make sense? I was in one room and then I was in a completely different location with completely different people, etc. In a similar way, not okay, wait, I realize that comparison can be a bit confusing because it doesn't necessarily mean people who take DMT then think this whole life is fake, but I'm just speaking specifically about clarity. So that's what I want you to take away from that example, and that's just to help you understand what people feel, whether it's whether any of it is true or not, that's not what we're arguing or speaking about at the moment. So that's toke one. After the second toke, many report very intense geometry, almost overlaying reality in very bizarre ways. So maybe it morphs onto the shapes of the objects in the room, or maybe it's just a simple overlay, almost like a filter. Many report ego death, which is a complete loss of subjective self identity, which again, in plain English, means your sense of identity or personality is dissolved. You being Ahmed, me being Khalil, what does that mean? Who are we? We just become awareness. So think of it like this. Usually we are awareness looking through a lens, and that lens is the ego, or again, when we say ego, we mean the person, like our personality, we mean our identity. Now this lens of identity dissolves, so it's just awareness. They mention that on the second toke, or on the first, second, or third toke, this ego death occurs, and they are just pure awareness. Users feel the need to slump back and close their eyes. What does this mean? It means that the DMT is very heavy, and it almost has a paralyzing effect on the human being. This bizarre sensation can often feel like dying, which research from Imperial College London suggests that people who take DMT feel like dying. And this is a bizarre sensation. And it's interesting as well, because how can people who haven't died come out with, I felt like I was dying, but that's what people report, which is interesting. And more could be said about this from an Islamic paradigm, but again, such arguments are contingent, and um, I wouldn't rely on it. Again, many close their eyes at this stage. They lie down and they report entering a tunnel or something called hyperspace. So they enter this hyperspace tunnel and they'll see impossible 4D geometry. Some say this is sacred geometry. If they've taken enough DMT or they've taken a large dose, then the third and final hit will be the breakthrough hit. The breakthrough hit just means they pass through this tunnel and break through the membrane. They break through into another space. This space is almost a different reality, which is just as real as the reality we are currently in right now. Oftentimes people report it being more real than real. And this isn't, me making this up. We'll look at statistics on this. But they report it being more real than the reality we are currently in now. Many users report it being so hard to comprehend that the language of this world, English, Spanish, Arabic, you cannot use language to describe it. It's beyond language, because our language has developed to suit the world we live in, right? Almost like if we take a baby comes into this world, the baby has no language for this world, simply because it's never been taught language for this world. It's never been in this world. So when it's in this world, it has to pick up the language before it can even begin to interact with the world properly. Until then, it's just trying to master its body and its mind. So again, people feel like babies in this world. Um, it's very bizarre. It's very bizarre. The space is usually or almost always inhabited by a or many entities. So there's usually one or there's plural entities, and these entities interact with the subjects in many various ways. And each interaction, again, it varies from person to person, and the nature of the entity is also different. Some themes are consistent, and we will explore these because these are outlined quite nicely in the John Hopkins study, which we'll share. Now, ayahuasca is different. So that was the DMT experience, and it was a summarized experience. Although it's 5 minutes, a lot is packed into the 5 minutes, so it's not a comprehensive description, but hopefully gives you a bit of understanding on what the DMT experience is. So ayahuasca lasts a lot longer and has a slow come up in comparison to DMT. It's made up of various drugs, so hamalas and harmine, tetrahydroharmine, etc. And therefore the experience is very different. And again, because it's so long, and I mentioned this earlier, because it could be 4, 6, 8, 12 hours, there is a greater scope for difference. Whereas in DMT, when you smoke it, it's very simple. You go through different stages of ego death, and you lie down, you go through a tunnel, you break through a tunnel, you enter a different space, you've exited the waiting room, you enter this new reality. You meet these entities, you have some sort of interaction with them. The entities are either really nice, kind of, mysterious, or they're quite evil. And again, this is oversimplification, but then, you're on your way back to this world and you come back and, you can't believe what happened. And then all of a sudden you almost feel the experience slipping away from you as if it never happened, because it becomes really hard to remember. Like that of a dream, when you wake up, it's sometimes really hard to remember what you dreamt about, even though we often dream multiple times a night. But yeah. So ayahuasca, because it's so long, there's a greater scope for it to be different. So some people could see flashbacks and re-experience or relive trauma. If they have PTSD, they've had a tough experience. They could have an experience where entities show them their addiction and communicate with them that they need to stop. Again, it's entirely subjective and it's really tough to explain. So many report being guided by spirits, or what they say is Mother Ayahuasca facing trauma. They go through a roller coaster of feelings through various dimensions. It's much less uniform than the smoke DMT experience, but the entities are reported to be fairly similar. It can be extremely tough at times, especially on ayahuasca, and it's not always bliss. Oftentimes, many people paint it, as this blissful experience. Sometimes it can be, but other times it can feel like you're in the depths of hell. So it varies, and one thing that people do is they paint ayahuasca and DMT to be a dreamland. It's not always. It could be, and many report that it is, but that's not always the case. And those who take it for fun, they take it thinking it's going to be a fun ride, oftentimes report having terrible experiences. So it's not all fun and games. What I'll now do is share the John Hopkins University study that we're talking about. So I'll share that now. Um, and we'll look at what it says. So I'll zoom in a bit. So here we have the study. So the background is that there are, experiences of having an encounter with seemingly autonomous entities, and this is reported after inhaling an N-dimethyltryptamine, i.e., when people smoke DMT, they often report seeing intelligent autonomous beings, and these experiences, being so bizarre, one need to be studied. So the aim is to study characterized uh, the study characterized the subjective phenomena, interpretation, and persisting changes that people attribute to DMT occasioned entity encounter experiences. Again, in plain English, the study aims to categorize DMT experiences and the entities specifically, and it does this in various ways. So this study was done with 2,561 people, and it was an online survey, and it was specifically about the most memorable entity encounters, which will then bring about limitations to the study. Um, and maybe, Ahmed, we can go on about that at the end, but yeah, let's look at the results first. So, respondents reported the primary senses involved in the encounter were visual and extrasensory. The most common descriptive labels for the entity were being, guide, spirit, alien, and helper. This is important. Although 41% of respondents reported fear during the encounter, the most prominent emotions both in the respondent and attributed to the entity were love, kindness, and joy. Most respondents endorsed that the entity had the attributes of being conscious, intelligent, and benevolent, existed in some real but different dimension of reality, and continued to exist after the encounter. These are all key points. Uh, this paragraph is gold. Respondents endorsed receiving a message, which was almost 70%, or prediction about the future, which was about 20% from the experience. More than half of those who identified as atheists before the experience no longer identified as atheists post the experience. This is extremely profound. The experiences were rated as amongst the most meaningful, spiritual, and psychologically insightful lifetime experiences with persisting positive changes in life satisfaction, purpose, and meaning attributed to the experience. So, this is a rich paragraph, and this sums up the study. Well, there's a conclusion, and we'll get back to this right at the end of reviewing the study. The conclusion is that DMT or NN-dimethyltryptamine occasioned entity encounter experiences have many similarities to the non-drug entity encounter experiences, such as those described in religious, alien abduction, and near-death contexts. Aspects of the experience and its interpretation produced profound and enduring ontological changes in worldview, i.e., you had people who were atheists before, and over half of them said they're no longer atheists. And, a key point here, and what summarized, the pink summarizes the blue, right? So, and the blue summarizes the whole study. The pink suggests that these entity encounters are extremely similar to those, in alien abduction or in religious experiences. This is extremely important. And Ahmed, I know you're going to hone in on this in just a second. So after we review this study, you'll take the reins from there. But let's look at what this study has to say. Okay. So the first thing we'll look at is the descriptive labels for the entity. I've split this in three sections. So there's being, guide, spirit, alien, helper, angel. These were the most frequent. Now, just to make this table make sense, this says could select all that apply. And that's why, for example, if they saw an entity that was a being, but that was also an elf, they would take both. And hence, the percentages don't add up to 100. So these seem quite positive: being, guide, spirit, alien, helper, angel. Maybe alien is a bit ambiguous, but all of them seem fairly positive. And this is the most predominant experience that people have, or the most predominant type of entity that they experience, which is interesting. Perhaps the entity chose, or perhaps the entities choose to present themselves in that way. That's interesting. Maybe, I mean, if they are intelligent entities, they can definitely choose, because it seems like they can shapeshift, so they can choose what form they come in. So perhaps this is what they want humans to perceive them as, or perhaps they are generally more positive. I mean, that right now we'll leave it at that. We're not going to read too much into it. The middle section, the pink section, I think is quite mysterious. Uh, elf, plant spirit, fairy, chemical spirit, animal spirit, religious personage. Again, these are, not seen as frequently, but they're still there. They're still around the 10% mark. And they're kind of mysterious. It could be good, could be bad. What is an elf? What is a gnome? An elf. Well, I guess gnome is in the next section, but what is an elf? It's ambiguous to me, at least. The next part is kind of dark. So clown, demon, gnome, monster, deceased family member. So seeing dead people, unknown dead people, dead friends, devil. Again, devil, clown, we're talking about 6, 1%, 2%. So these are the least common experiences, but they're still common enough to show up multiple times. Because remember, we're dealing with thousands of people here. So, it's not just, one or two people. No, these are commonly seen. Um, and yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that. We'll let you think about that as we progress. We'll next look at this. So additional details of the encounter experience and the metaphysical implications. So how real was the experience compared to normal everyday waking consciousness? At the time of the encounter, 77.3. 77.3. How real was it after the encounter? 63. So after the encounter, people were less inclined to believe it was real. Why? Perhaps people felt as if, oh no, that couldn't have been real, and they almost denied it. There was a level of, kufr that they had in the experience. They didn't want it to be true, perhaps. Or perhaps they genuinely felt like, oh, almost like a dream. It felt real at the time, but it didn't feel real after the experience. That's also an explanation. The experience was more real than everyday waking consciousness as it felt during the experience, 81%. And again, the experience was more real than everyday waking consciousness as it feels now, 65%. So a majority of people still believe it to be more real than everyday waking consciousness, even after the experience. But again, there is a jump, there is a gap, and we've, as explained above. From your current perspective, where did the entity exist? In normal everyday physical reality, this was a minority. In some real but different dimensional reality, and both 1 and 2, 26. So most people either believe that they exist in normal reality, or they exist in some real but different dimension, which is interesting. The entity continued to exist after the encounter. Again, majority said yes, yes, which is interesting. I'm going to say interesting about that, about every single statistic. So I'll probably stop doing that because you'll get annoyed as viewers. The experience has altered your fundamental concept of reality, without a doubt. The experience has produced a desirable alteration in your fundamental concept of reality. Majority said yes, but a lot said no as well. 40% said that it didn't produce a desirable alteration in our fundamental concept of reality, our base concept of reality, how do we view what reality is, and that change. Most said yes, it was desirable, most being 60%, but 40% said no, it wasn't a positive or it wasn't a desirable alteration. The entities were conscious, intelligent, self aware, benevolent, sacred, had agency in this world, i.e., it could affect outcomes, eternal. Eternal, that was 42%. Again, it's going down. Negatively judgmental, malicious. Only 10% were malicious. I guess I'm rounding, but 10% were malicious. Interesting again. Again, I use interesting. Before the encounter, 28% were atheists, and after, only 10%, which is almost 2/3 who are no longer atheists. Which is, I mean, that's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. You can read this if you want, but in every way, people started to believe in the metaphysical more. So their belief in a higher power increased, in the sense that the number of people who believed in a higher power increased. This for me is a extremely important part of the study, because it talks about specifically the quotes that people, it was open ended. So these are certain quotes. So some saying love is the answer to everything. This was quite common. 406 people said that this happened. Um, you know, worship me. This was a task. So a task, 280 people said that the message was something about, worship me. This is interesting. I mean, we spoke about shirk earlier. So, those who aren't looking at this from the Islamic paradigm, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you when an entity who you've just met, who you hardly understand, who is almost analyzing and studying you, is saying, worship me? That's a task, that's an instruction or a command, worship me. What does that mean to you? From an Islamic paradigm, that's quite clear. That'd be shirk, but yeah, interconnectedness. So the universe or everything is connected in some way, shape, or form. Death. A fair amount of people said that this space was the after-death space, or this is the information that was communicated to them. That death isn't the end. The entity showed me knowledge, learn, and educate myself again. It's a bit more ambiguous. This one's interesting. Prediction. Prediction about the future. I thought about a missing Zippo lighter for some reason, and they flashed to me where it was. And after I came back, I went to that spot deep inside a couch and grabbed it perfectly. It was unreal. They predicted the future, and they were able to show me where it was. And that was about 100 people who said that that happened. Some sort of prediction. Divinity. I was essentially told that I was God, or gave me some information that said that the being was in service of God. So yeah, all very bizarre things. Again, this is I believe it's a different table, but this is about predictions of the future. So there is going to be a clear, distinct divide and restructuring of society with the assistance of extraterrestrial consciousness. Again, this was, and again, there was not that many people who spoke about this, so this is going to be um, an insight into those who saw predictions or those who felt like they saw predictions. So the most that people answered were 152, and that was on personal life events. So they were shown how their life will be without my addiction, or shown how the way my life was heading into further depression and potential suicide, and how it would impact my family, and etc. etc. So these are all predictions about the future, the negative state of the world, humanity will destroy itself. I saw my future self through its eyes. Death is just the beginning. Again, these are all predictions. I'm not going to go over every single one. Predictions about when I'll die. I'll die June 27th, 2067. Again, yeah. So these are all interesting things, and we'll go back now to the start. So these experiences were real, i.e., people felt like they were real. People felt like these experiences were more real than real. They existed but in some real. They existed in some real but different dimension of reality and continue to exist after the encounter. They received messages or predictions about the future, and those who identified as being atheist, at least over half, I didn't identify as atheist anymore. I.e., they believed that there was some sort of high power out there, and it was the most meaningful experience that most people had experienced, uh, which is, completely out there. And finally, the entity encounter experiences have many similarities to the non-drug entity encounter experiences, such as those described in religious or alien abduction experiences. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Brother Ahmed, to take on with Bismillah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for sharing that, and thank you very much for going over that study and giving us the very thorough analysis. Very much appreciate it. So let's start with the end of that abstract for the John Hopkins study. You had the last thing that they mentioned was that DMT entity encounter experiences are extremely similar to non-DMT entity encounter experiences, and that's kind of what I want to show you guys today and talk about is the non-DMT entity encounter experiences. And inshallah, we'll show you guys by the end that they're one and the same. So just in case those don't know or don't believe in this kind of stuff and they say, okay, well, I don't really believe in UFOs, I do want to show you this. So this was CNN. Pentagon officially releases UFO videos. This was in 2020, and there was one as recently as April 2021, this month, the month of recording this video, 2021. They had another one, pyramid-shaped, Illuminati confirmed, pyramid-shaped UFO, right? It was like a little triangle-looking thing. You have this one. I'm not going to play this video. You guys can look at this on your own time, and this is official releases. So I think the 2020, this one, I don't remember who saw it, but again, the Pentagon released it, the Pentagon released it confirmed. In the 2021 video, a Navy pilot was the one that actually recorded it. And you can actually find the way that they document sightings is by looking at, okay, you have witnesses and then you have radar. So whether the UFO was clocked on radar, and then you have clocked on radar and witness sightings. So if a pilot sees a UFO and his jet or his plane, the radar of it clocks the UFO at the same time, then they consider that very high credibility. And there's thousands of these. So that's just there. 1950s was the first serious research. U.S. government started Project Blue Book, and Project Blue Book shut down. Basically, the conclusion was that all of this is just natural phenomenon that people are mistaking it for, and that wasn't a very convincing conclusion because these projects continue and they're still looking into it. So I want to introduce to you guys one of the researchers into this, and these are, again, just like how you have official government reports, you have very respectable scientists looking into this, not just fringe scientists. It's not just fringe scientists. It's very respectable scientists that are accepted by the community, and one such is Jakes Vallée. Jakes Vallée is a computer scientist, worked with NASA, and is currently serving and on the French CNES. So I forget what the CNES stands for, but it's basically the space agency of France. You have NASA in America and you have European space agencies. CNES is the French one, and he's currently serving as on the expert committee there. And they have their own department that look into unidentified flying objects or as the Navy or and the Air Force called them, UAP, right? Unidentified aerial phenomena. So that's that. And he's one of the big researchers, and I'm showing you guys him because I'm gonna look at one of his books very soon and talk to you about it. But he was mentioning some things that researchers can look at and quantify scientifically, right? Are there global patterns to the data? What are the physical facts of the phenomenon? Are there special locations where the phenomenon manifests? What are the social and cultural factors? This is an important one. What is the impact on humans? And what scientific methodology is best suited to study this, and what statistical method would be best used to look through all the data. So the ETH, or the extraterrestrial hypothesis, is the most widely accepted hypothesis, and there are many scientists who argue against it. Jacques Vallée is one of the most famous ones. And this is not simply because they feel that there's not enough evidence, but because they feel that the evidence actually proves something completely different than the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So this, what they like to call this phenomenon, or what some of the researchers have called it, is instead of extraterrestrials, they've called it ultra terrestrials. So in one of his books, and this was one of the groundbreaking books, it was published in 1979. It was called Passport to Magonia. And Brother Khalil, if you could share this, the picture of the book for those who are interested, they can see it. So Passport to Magonia was one of the groundbreaking books, and it really pushed hard against the extraterrestrial hypothesis and for an ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. He goes over almost 1,000 close encounters and documents the similarities across cultures and across time to try and come to a conclusion on this. And he believes that UFO sightings, ghost sightings, angel sightings, demon sightings are all part of the exact same phenomena that manifests itself differently according to time and place. He has written many books on this. In one book, he called Messengers of Deception, and that title says a lot, Messengers of Deception. He actually shows his distrust of the entities by examining the cults that worship him. So Passport to Magonia was looking at abductee experiences. Messengers of the Deception was more looking at contactee experiences. So contactee experiences, meaning that the alien didn't abduct them, but a UFO came down and talked to the person and had a message for them, or some task, or some deal that they made with them, right? Whereas Passport to Magonia was looking at these different similarities between, okay, you have abduction reports, and then in the past, people thought that their children were being abducted by fairies or elves, and fairy and elf sightings, and looking at all of the similarities between these phenomenon. So fact that the contactees became fanatics that believe in factually incorrect information, this is literally true. You have cults where someone believes that aliens are talking to them. The aliens say the world is going to end on this day. Nothing happens on that day. And they continue on in their fanaticism. Instead of questioning the entity, they just try and come up with another explanation that, oh, they're just testing our faith and we're firm believers, blah, blah, blah. So they're believing in factually incorrect information that is easily proven false, and that the entities actually seem to care very little for their chosen mediums or contacts. This fact is also explored in another book called Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel. I'll show you guys that in a minute. These cults and contactee experiences generally share many of the same features and characteristics, and I'm going to touch upon that in a moment. So if you guys will bear with me, please, I will share with you guys in a passage from the book Passport to Magonia, just so that you can see from the author himself what he's trying to say. For the time being, let me simply state again my basic contention. The modern global belief in flying saucers and their occupants is identical to an earlier belief in the fairy faith. The entities described as the pilots of the craft are indistinguishable from the elves, sylphs, and lutins of the Middle Ages. Through the observation of unidentified flying objects, we are concerned with an agency our ancestors knew well and regarded with terror. We are prying into the affairs of the secret commonwealth. And again, he says the phenomenon surrounding all of these different events is basically the same phenomenon, and it follows the same pattern. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. So I want to show you guys another excerpt from the book. And this is from Operation Trojan Horse. So Brother Khalil, if you can show them the cover of Operation Trojan Horse. Again, this is for people that are interested and want to read a little more into this. Please go ahead and do so. The answer seemed to be communication with the dead. These communicative efforts led to the foundation of spiritualism, and the entities played the role to the hilt, using their complete, and again, I disagree with this. I don't think they have complete knowledge of us, but they pretend like they might, using their complete knowledge of us and our individual lives to provide us with proof of the existence of a spirit world. This is the same precise methodology being employed with the UFOs to build up support for the extraterrestrial thesis. So basically, just like how in the just like how in the past, people were saying, oh, we're a medium and spirits contact us, or spirits of the dead contact us. And these spirits, quote unquote, will show them, oh, I know where this fact about you or this hidden thing is. The UFO phenomenon is doing something very similar to convince you that there's an extraterrestrial thing going on. When in reality, they both are same for same, right? So this is a comparison chart between UFO reports and ghost cases, basically, or supernatural sightings. And you see the overlap here. It's overlaps. When there's a higher frequency of UFO sightings, there's also a higher frequency of ghost sightings, and and similar sightings, right, of supernatural beings, for want of a better word, supernatural beings. And how does all of this tie up? Because some people might say, well, it could still be aliens. Like, why can't there be this and this? How are you saying they're both the same? So again, I want to, instead of just putting words in the author's mouth, I'm showing you guys these passages so that I want to let their own research speak for itself. So here we have another passage, and this is going to be the last one, I promise. If you look in the bottom, you see there are countless. Let me see if I can make it easier for you guys to see. There are countless sightings of objects that change size and shape in front of the viewers, or split into several smaller objects, each going off in a different direction. In some cases, this process was reversed, with several small lights converging together to form a single large one, which then went dashing off. Over and over again, witnesses have told me in hushed tones, I don't think that the thing I saw was mechanical at all. I got the distinct impression that it was alive. So you have researchers such as John Besser and Ivan T. Sanderson have openly discussed the possibility that some UFOs may indeed be living creatures. It's a mixed bag. So he goes on and on about this, but basically, a cloud forming into a UFO, or a UFO vanishing like a mirage, or a UFO splitting up from a machine into small different machines and flying away, or even balls of light forming together and flying off and transforming into a UFO. So this doesn't fit our understanding of machinery and material physical machinery, but this does fit the same pattern of the ghost sightings and these other sightings where people see a great ball of light coming to them, or different creatures converging together, or a cloud of dust, or something looks like it's coming out of a fire and it transforms into a creature and dematerializes and transforms into something else. This materialization dematerialization is one of the most common themes in all of these sightings. This is from a book, and Brother Khalid, if you could also share the cover of that book. It's called Dimensions, a casebook of alien contact. And don't worry about the wording. We're just looking at the table. So basically, he goes into quote unquote religious miracles and UFO events, and he compares them. And most of his work is actually from Passport to Magonia, because he laid a lot of groundwork in there. So we go into the similarities between these quote unquote miracles. He gets from Joseph Smith, who is the founder of the Mormon religion, and he sees similarities between his experiences and the experiences of people that have these UFO experiences. Some very famous religious apparitions, such as Fatima, where people thought that they saw the ghost of Maryam alayhi salam, the mother of Isa, and she gave predictions, and it was a very mass witness report. And you guys can look that up. It's very famous. This was one of the famous cases in the 1900s. Uh, Mass sighting of that one. And it was actually confirmed by the Catholic Church. They confirmed it, and they actually have those prophecies in their archives. So with these authors, I mean, there's so much to go into, but with these authors, just one thing I do want to note is that they don't differentiate between genuine religious experiences and alien contact. So, just as there's a distinction between a genuine miracle and magic, or a prophet and a magician, these authors don't really delve into these distinctions, and they just lump them all into the same category and call it, okay, this is the supernatural category, the ultra terrestrial category. And I just want to give my caveat there. I don't agree with everything that these authors say. I do think that they're putting in some important research, but I just want to say I I don't necessarily agree that, well, not necessarily, I don't agree that all of these supernatural experiences are part of the same thing. There are different. Basically, there's a difference between a miracle, between magic, and between a mental illness. This is a deep topic to be covered probably for another video. So how can someone know if a prophet is a magician, or someone who says a prophet just suffering from a mental illness? How can we determine if it's real or not? There's actually a criterion for that. And like I said, we can get into that video another time. The point though is sharing with you that these DMT, these non-DMT entity encounter experiences have the same or very similar commonalities. So I haven't found a chart like the one that I showed you guys mentioning the similarities between UFOs and DMT entities as laid out in that book. But that's because it's a very new area of exploration for Western scientists. So there's no published research that I could find. But they have mentioned that there are similarities. So such behavior includes giving a message, asking a human to share the message, telling a human they will evolve to a higher level of consciousness, or even apotheosis, which is that they're a god or that they're going to become a god, making a contract or a deal or an exchange of gifts, sexual contact, this is very common, possession or spiritual attack, bright lights, feeling of paralysis, right? And Brother Khalil mentioned all of these, the feeling of paralysis, telepathic communication, lying about their nature, and I'll get into that in a little bit, lying about their nature, and giving some hidden info. And we already went into the hidden info, or some intimate detail that the person has that no one else knows about, that they somehow are able to obtain about you. And they tell that to you to convince you of the truthfulness of their message or the truthfulness of who they are. We have the whole experience with the lighter and the couch, lying about their nature. So many people with the UFO alien experiences, the aliens will always change up their answer about where they're from. Oh, we're from this planet. Oh, we're from that planet. Oh, actually, we're from a planet that's, on the other side of the sun. So you go have the solar system, we're on the other side of the sun. There are other planets on the other side. Oh, we're from this solar system, from another solar system very far away. So always a different answer. And no, you can't, it's not a bunch of different aliens coming to the planet all at the same time. Again, the phenomenon follows very specific patterns that we can track. Telepathic communication, feeling of paralysis. Again, with the DMT experience, you get the feeling of paralysis, you get the telepathic communication with the beings, the bright lights, possession or spiritual attack. Some people might think, oh, sexual contact. How is DMT entities and non-DMT? Yes, actually, that is a very big one throughout history. Whether someone's kidnapped by a fairy or by an elf, the sexual contact is made, right, willingly or unwillingly. And then you have with the whole UFO abduction reports, you have similar things where basically the person will have sex with an alien that looks like a half human, half alien type of thing. Or in the DMT, uh, with DMT hallucinations, people have sex with the DMT entities as well. Giving a message, the messages are pretty much the same, or asking a human to share the message with them, giving them some type of task. Why are they coming up as aliens or UFOs? During this materialist, atheist, industrialist, technologist phase of human history, the entities are simply appearing in the way that they know that human beings will accept. So the researchers are noting that in our modern era, right, we have literally developed our own modern version of the fairy tale through UFO sightings. And we should be extremely skeptical of the entity's benevolence, their truthfulness, and their goodwill. Many of the messages that they have extremely bad implications once people truly sit down. I don't think Ibrahim went over this, but this was in the John Hopkins study, which is that love is the answer to everything. There was that message being played out. This is also a message that's being played out in other entity encounter experiences. So no morals, no right or wrong. Love is the answer to everything. That in and of itself is a very bad message. What does it mean that there's no right and there's no wrong and there's no morals with which we can, conduct ourselves with? Anything goes, right? Do we love that which is evil or love that which is bad? People should eliminate culture and money. Again, this sounds like communism, no family, everyone is the same, eliminating all differences. So it has a very negative connotation to this. You are chosen and you're special, and entities saying that you are the chosen one or that they themselves are the chosen one. You have the superiority and racism in there. You will evolve into a higher level. This is another message, and this, if you guys notice, these were, or not all of them, but many of them were in the DMT study, right, by John Hopkins. You'll This was a big one. You'll evolve to a higher level. This is again another cult-like belief. People believing that they are a god, right? And the aliens saying to worship them. That is a big flag in and of itself. Or the aliens saying that person is a god. And again, what proof is there of that? What do you mean when you say that? So I'm presenting all of this evidence to say that the DMT entities are part of the same phenomenon as the UFO experience. And next, we're going to look at how these drugs allow people to access this phenomenon and what exactly is this phenomenon. So, how does all of this segue into our topic on the connection between UFOs, ayahuasca or DMT, and magic? So, if inshallah, if we can go into the definition of magic, if you could show us, please. And this is the Islamic definition of magic, but if you're not Muslim, you will be convinced that this is the correct definition of magic because it makes sense. So just being honest here, just makes perfect sense. So let's take a look here. Explanation. And where is this book from? Just so that people don't know, if for people who know or don't know.
Sure, this is an explanation of the 10 nullifiers of Islam. Um, Maybe you can link it in the description, inshallah.
We'll link it inshallah and the Sheikh as well. Magic is defined in many ways by the scholars, but the closest definition is ruqa, uh, words said by magicians and knots which affect the heart and body of someone, leading to sickness and or death, or separating husband and wife. These are some examples of magic effects. Magic is of two kinds, and this is the important part, guys. Magic is by using ruqa and knights. Ruqa, knots, sorry, not knights. Ruqa is like saying certain types of words, right? And knots, tying of knots, or the ritual, basically, whether it's drawing something, burning something, tying something in knots, using some type of doll or voodoo doll, whatever it is, some type of ritual of doing something with some type of words that you say. This type is done with the help of shayateen, basically devils, evil beings, by worshiping them so that they provide their services to the magician. This type is shirk, polytheism, and whoever practices it is a kafir, basically a kafir. You all know what a kafir means. Two, magic is by using herbs and medicine. So think, guys, the witch's potion when she's doing the cauldron and throwing things inside the pot and it's bubbling up and they're dancing around the fire. That kind of magic, right? And shamans also putting things on their eyes so they can see otherworldly beings, as well as even in things popular culture. Harry Potter had a freaking potions class, guys. Magic by using herbs and medicine. This may have some effect on basically the goal of taking these is to see the entity. There's a dispute among the scholars with regard to this type of magic and whether it constitutes apostasy or not. Some people think it does make someone an apostate. Some people don't think so because uh, for many reasons. And it makes sense why there's a dispute here because the nature is different. People, so ultimately, if magic is of two kinds, one which is basically incantations and spells and rituals, on the other kind, which is potion, the demon to do something for you or to talk to him or her, and magic using herbs or potions to achieve the same exact effect. So DMT and these psychedelic drugs, which allow people to see entities that behave in the way that they behave, and there basically are entities, you are involved in the very definition of witchcraft. The jinn are, we were saying man was created from clay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us from clay. And some people say this is matter-based intelligence, although I don't like to give scientific terminologies to things of religion. It's problematic, but we'll go with this for the time being. Matter-based intelligence. And there's jinn, right? Energy-based intelligence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them from smokeless fire. They have the ability to fly. They have the ability to shape shift. And inshallah, if you want, you can show the hadith um, on jinn and the different types of jinn. And the Quran mentions how these jinn uh, in the past would come to people and people would worship them, or people would ask for help from the jinn, and that these jinn would come in different forms and basically come in the form of that god. So if someone was worshiping a statue, so the jinn could come in the form of that god or goddess and basically talk to the human or communicate to them in that way. And that people thought that these jinns were gods and they took them as gods. And this would be then the connecting string, that if Sam is telling you Allah created something that was made out of smokeless fire, that these entities have the ability to shapeshift, that these entities interact with people in various ways, and that people used to worship them or think that they were a god or a goddess, depending on where they were. This falls in line exactly with what we were saying about with the entity experiences, how the UFOs look like UFOs in our time, how they look like elves in other times, gnomes in other countries, and how they communicate with people via the DMT and the ayahuasca experience, i.e., when someone smokes or consumes these psychedelic drugs, they connect with these entities. And this is exactly what, dogs barking from there. This is exactly what magicians and shamans do. They take these drugs so that they can connect with these entities and be taught by these entities, or to ask these entities questions, or to have these entities help them in some way. And in this book here, the Exorcist Tradition by in Islam by Bilal Phillips, very good book. He talks about how Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, says that uh, what can happen frequently, if you see here possession, as chapter, I don't know if you all can see it, but it's called possession of objects. So the jinn can actually possess plants or possess animals and say, I have such and such beneficial property. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote, I know people whom the plants greet and inform them of their beneficial ingredients. However, it is in fact Satan who has entered the plant and spoke to them. I also know of others to whom stones and trees speak, saying, Congratulations, O saint of God. I am acquainted with yet others who have gone bird hunting, and the sparrows address them, saying, Take me so that the poor may eat me. Again, he says, such are the cases of evil jinn possessing birds in the same way that they possess humans and talk through them. He further wrote, and this is actually something that has been noted historically that people actually uh, have experienced. He further wrote, the jinn also enter idols, speak to those who worship the idols, and fulfill some of their needs. Uh, so that's very interesting when we think of the ayahuasca and how it was made, and the tribal people saying the plants told us. Just recently, a couple years ago in India, and I'm trying to just give you guys some examples here so you can understand that this phenomenon is very widespread, but it's not really talked about as much as it should be talked about, but it does influence our thoughts and our culture in the background. You had in India, for example, there was a day where all statues all across India, and I think even Hindu statues in other places outside of India, such as America and other countries, they would give the statues milk and the milk would disappear off the spoon. So this is something that made people believe, oh my God, my religion is real. Hinduism is real. I'm a stronger practicing Hindu now. And it's the same type of behavior, for example, when someone sees a UFO, oh, the UFO came and talked to me. I saw the disc. I'm a believer now. I believe. And this is not how we should come to conclusions of what is truth and what is not true, right? We should be more rational in our approach to religion. And I don't want to be preachy, guys, but this is what I love about Islam, where there was an instance where someone passed away, someone very important in the Islamic community passed away, and at the same day there was an eclipse. And the Muslim community said that there is an eclipse because of this person. The Prophet Muhammad said, no, the eclipse is just an eclipse, and it's just a celestial body doing its thing. It doesn't have anything to do with someone dying or not dying, and don't say that. Basically, getting rid of primitive beliefs and superstitions and freeing them from this type of mentality that actually oppresses someone and oppresses their own mind and their own reason and prevents them from seeing the truth and makes them become a fanatic into these supernatural types of events, and ultimately letting jinn and these types of beings influence them. So I feel like I've been rambling a lot. Khalil, if you want to say something.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that people may have, reservations about is the fact that how can witchcraft exist? But if you go to, I mean, usually people say that often haven't traveled that much, like, and that's not to say people who travel inherently believe in such things, but if you go to, for example, Mexico, there is a very rich culture of magic. So, you know, you'll go to the locals and they'll say, just don't go to that cave or don't go at this time because the witches will be, you know, doing their ceremonies, etc. Or India or Pakistan, even countries that have, you know, majority Muslim populations. It's well known that there is magic. And I'm just gonna share a quick clip by Mufti Munir who explains very briefly how plants do have a role in magic, and then we'll link that back to the topic, inshallah. So this is um, this is the clip, if you can see that.
And the scholars of Islam say that sihr can be uqad, okay? It can be ruqa, it can be spells, incantations, medicines, and of course, there's a long history between sorcery and the study of herbs and different drinks and tonics. There's a connection between the two. All right, so that's prohibited, and there lies no doubt if it involves seeking the help and the support of a spirit, quote unquote, of a jinni, quote unquote, then no doubt that's going to be included in sihr for good or for bad of people. Mufti.
And so I think it's important to remember that when we speak about ayahuasca, just look at the cultural references that we have about magic, which you mentioned a few, like the potions and the witches brewing different plant material. It's very reminiscent of how ayahuasca is brewed. And when they did brew it thousands of years ago, how did they know that the plant containing DMT was rich in DMT? And how did they know the plant containing the MAOI, or the enzyme that allows it to be, you know, ingested and enter the bloodstream? How do they know that those two combine together? And they will say, well, the plants told us, the spirits told us, which makes no sense. But if we look at it through the lens of the Islamic paradigm, you know, you've
And it
spoken about,
starts to make perfect sense at that point.
exactly, it makes perfect sense. And you know, even other variants of DMT. So when this is topic isn't really about it, but there's another variant called 5-MeO DMT, which is produced by toads. And if you think about, you know, all of these ceremonies, like, you know, getting the leg of a toad, etc., and boiling it, it's very reminiscent of what even Western culture is trying to paint magic as. Um, so I think it's 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 pretty obvious. The only reason why people would accept the DMT entities but wouldn't accept magic would be reservations towards religion and seeing it as dogma. But I think if you
I
try and
mean,
have an
how
open,
would you respond to someone that says, "Oh, okay, well, I don't take it with the intention of magic. I don't want, like, I don't believe in these." And so, what would you say to someone who says that if they're just taking DMT and they're saying, "Well, it's not magic. It's not a ritual. It's just something that you do and you smoke it and that's it." So, how would you respond to that person?
I think that's never really the case. There's always a ritual. There's always a ritual, firstly, because you have to mentally prepare yourself. Anyone who's in this, you know, subculture of being a psychonaut knows that it's not just for fun. People do it with an intention. They do it with a specific intention to heal. Some say, I'm doing it to better improve myself, to get over an addiction, or to become a better person, to grow. So there's already some intention. There's already an intention of exploring consciousness. There's some intention in the beginning. Secondly, there is a process. You can't just get the DMT. You have to seek it. You have to look for it. And even then, when you're in such a state, if you are potentially committing magic, just because you didn't intend to, it doesn't mean you didn't do it. So someone doesn't intend to worship a grave, but they still bow down and make sujood to it. They're still doing it, regardless of whether they're ignorant or not. You can deny it, but you're still doing it.
I think that is like when I see the definition of magic and I see the disagreement between whether people that take potions are non-Muslims or not, I can definitely see the wisdom of the scholars because they understood that there is a difference between the two types of magic. One being that you definitely know what you're doing if you're making a spell and you're doing a ritual, but someone taking the potion might not actually know what they're doing. They might not realize just how harmful it is. But people that take DMT or ayahuasca are basically involved and engaging in the very definition of witchcraft without whether they realize it or not, and all of the harmful effects from doing that will eventually come and bite them in the butt eventually. And some of the biggest I mean, you were talking to me another day about Terence McKenna, who was one of the biggest advocates of of taking these drugs and what happened to him in the end.
Yeah, so I mean, for those who don't know, very briefly, Terence McKenna was someone who was, I would say, a da'i. He was a caller. He was a caller to DMT, and Rick Strassman said about him that the uncertainty about DMT's effects helped the drug remain relatively obscure until Terence McKenna began praising it publicly. So, he started
So he
lavishing
kind of
about
started the whole culture of taking DMT.
100%. I mean, more than anyone, Terence McKenna has raised awareness of DMT through lectures, books, interviews, recordings to its present unprecedented level. And he wrote this in DMT, the Spirit Molecule. So to this day, I have never come across somebody who has been more influential in the, calling to DMT than Terence McKenna. And he was a very big proponent of DMT, and he also was a big proponent of psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah, magic
And
mushroom.
he coined this idea of taking a heroic dose, which is 5 grams in silent darkness. For those who don't know, that's a lot, and it's also a really weird setting. Why darkness? And if you know anything or about how some magicians try to contact spirits, that's
It's always
exactly
in a
what they do
dark room. Yeah, sounds like
in a
magic to me.
cave or in a dark room, and they'll lock themselves for a few days, and they'll be in isolation waiting for the spirit. So I mean, there's so many links, and he
Yeah.
definitely knew exactly what he was doing. He was a well-educated person. He was one of the first individuals to travel to the Amazon rainforest from the Western world to try ayahuasca, and that was his mission
So
with
he
his
made the
brother.
ayahuasca trip popular that Joe Rogan and all of these people talk about now.
100%. I mean, Joe Rogan's had his brother on the show who, they went to ayahuasca together. Many people look up to the two of them. And although Terence McKenna has died, his work still lives on. His lectures are all over the YouTube. His books, are very well known. And in one of his books, True Hallucinations, he actually talks about the end of his experiences at La Chorrera, which we'll show on screen now. We'll put up the screenshots, inshallah. He speaks about how he saw a UFO. He saw a UFO, and one of the profound parts for me was when he said, "Well, someone could say I've just taken all of these drugs, mushrooms, ayahuasca, etc., so I could be tripping, or there could be residual effects. But actually, the fact that I've had every known drug experience in this class works against that argument because I know every single visual that you can have, and this wasn't any kind of visual that I've had before, where clouds condense and become a UFO which spirals above my head, and so yeah, it's he he's definitely an interesting figure, and if we ever do another video about this topic,
Yeah,
we'll
I think we should save that for another topic because he had his own very negative experience. But I think the point with what we were going with was that this is definitely a ritual. Even people that don't believe in anything treat it as a ritual. Respect the plant, respect the drug, setting it in a dark room. So yeah, I like your answer that basically there's always a ritual involved. There's
And
always.
Terence was, I mean, he concluded in his book, True Hallucinations, and he said this in many lectures, that he believes and he thinks that these entities are what the shamans say, and that's ancestors. He says they're dead people, and it's, you're just stumbling upon an ecology of souls, um, which is interesting because in the John Hopkins University study, people did report seeing dead people, but that was his conclusion. So he still
But he might
believed in,
also be a messenger of deception himself because he also says that they're machine elves as well. So he has different answers.
yeah,
So yeah, it looks like and if you guys, for those who have taken this, for those who know people that have taken this, or for those who are thinking of taking it, our message to you, just to wrap this up, is don't do it. Okay, you are engaged in witchcraft, whether you realize it or not. These entities that you see are the same entities that people encounter in the UFO encounters. They're the same entities that people encountered thousands of years ago when they said that they were kidnapped by elves or kidnapped by fairies. The behavior is exactly the same behavior. And ultimately, they are going. You should not and cannot trust them because even if you feel good about the encounter, the message that they are giving you, when you think about on a deeper level, has a lot of problems when it's implemented in the real world. And you don't know whether they have your best interest at heart. You can't say that they do just because of a feeling, especially when you look at all of the cases across time. So, anything you want to add, brother?
yeah. I mean, at first these experiences may seem so life-changing, and they may seem so insightful. You may feel like you're breaking the limits of consciousness, etc. But it will never end well. Let's take Terence McKenna as a case study. I mean, he had a trip in Hawaii in around the late 1980s, and it was such a, a tough trip for him to stomach that many say that he never took it. And whilst the story is not 100% clear, from what we know, it looks like he didn't take it for 10 years up until he died. So there's a reason for that. I mean, he was such a big proponent. Why didn't he continue to take it until his last days? There's a reason why.
Yeah, he just stopped taking it for 10 years, which means he basically got scared of whatever he tripped out and saw.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So these things aren't a joke, and they will, once these entities have used you for whatever they want to use you for, then they don't care about you, like you said. So don't think that this is some dynamic relationship where you're going to profit and you're going to gain some insight. Any question that you may have, or any answer, sorry, that you may feel like you've gained, you're going to gain 20 more questions. It's never going to satisfy you, and you're always going to feel like you need to go back, but you're never going to learn anything. There's no knowledge.
It's like the Quran said that I wish I hadn't taken this person or this being as a wali and hamima, like my intimate companion. And even people that are into magic, they have their own spirit being that they call a familiar. Literally, he's familiar with me and familiar with everything. So it's just ridiculous, the amount of, like, you can write a whole book on the amount of similarities of experiences between witchcraft, the UFO experience, and the DMT experience, and how it's all the same. And just the fact that they come to you in these different forms and these different guises just to get you to believe what you're saying based on your own beliefs shows that there's a lot of deception going on and a lack of truthfulness. Which, if you don't want to listen to us because you're saying that, oh, you guys are just coming at it from a religious point of view, we've presented evidence from people that don't necessarily see it from that angle, and they're looking at it from an angle where they're just looking at thousands of case studies and saying, look, this is what we see here, and this is very detrimental, this is harmful, and this is very troubling, and it's very worrying. And the ends of people that go into this usually doesn't end well. So that's our warning to you guys. You can stop. Yeah.
Just before we wrap up, I just wanted to share these like maybe 3 minutes of a clip from Surah Al-Araf. So this is the 7th chapter in the Quran. I think it just sums up everything that we've said in this video quite nicely. So yeah, Bismillah.
ويا آدم اسكن أنت وزوجك الجنة فكلا من حيث شئتما ولا تقربا هذه الشجرة فتكونا من الظالمين فوسوس لهما الشيطان ليبدي لهما ما وري عنهما من سوآتهما وقال ما نهاكما ربكما عن هذه الشجرة إلا أن تكونا ملكين أو تكونا من الخالدين وقاسمهما إني لكما لمن الناصحين فدلاهما بغرور فلما ذاقا الشجرة بدت لهما سوآتهما وطفقا يخصفان عليهما من ورق الجنة وناداهما ربهما ألم أنهكما عن تلكما الشجرة وأقل لكما إن الشيطان لكما عدو مبين قالا ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين قال اهبطوا بعضكم لبعض عدو ولكم في الأرض مستقر ومتاع إلى حين قال فيها تحيون وفيها تموتون ومنها تخرجون يا بني آدم قد أنتم أنزلنا عليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم وريشا ولباس التقوى ذلك خير ذلك من آيات الله لعلهم يذكرون يا بني آدم لا يفتننكم الشيطان كما أخرج أبويكم من الجنة ينزع عنهما لباسهما ليريهما سوآتهما إنه يراكم هو وقبيله من حيث لا ترونهم إنا جعلنا الشياطين أولياء للذين لا يؤمنون وإذا فعلوا فاحشة قالوا وجدنا عليها آباءنا والله أمرنا بها قل إن الله لا يأمر بالفحشاء أتقولون على الله ما لا تعلمون قل أمر ربي بالقسط وأقيموا وجوهكم عند كل مسجد وادعوه مخلصين له الدين كما بداكم تعودون فريقا هدى وفريقا حق عليهم الضلالة إنهم اتخذوا الشياطين أولياء من دون الله ويحسبون أنهم مهتدون.
SubhanAllah, man. I know we keep saying let's wrap it up, and I don't want to say anything after those verses because I feel like that should just hit everyone in a different way. I just do want to point out that message, which is you will become immortals or you'll become angels, right? Is the same message that these entities in the DMT experiences are telling people. You're going to evolve into a higher level of consciousness. You're going to be a god or to worship me as these types of things. It's the same thing that the DMT entities are telling people. And it's the same thing that the UFO experiences, abductees or not abductees, contactees experience aliens telling them. Very similar, right? Messages. So subhanAllah.
The forbidden fruits have been around since the beginning of mankind. This is nothing new. We're not dealing with anything new. This is ancient stuff we're talking about. So, don't be deceived is what we're trying to say. This is the message of this video. Look like.
Yeah, and knowledge is power, man. If you don't know what these DMT entities are, they can trick you into believing that they're anything. But once you know that they're jinn, and that this is the nature of the jinn and this is how they operate, it's much easier than for you to understand that you're being lied to. So
you're being lied to by mortal entities that are no more intelligent than you are. They just can see you where you can't see them, and that's the only difference. And they, they don't have power over you. Only Allah does.
Exactly, guys. So yeah, subhanAllah, I'm telling you whatever you want to hear so they can get you to do what you want. And the people that take DMT and have these ayahuasca, many of them do report entering into some kind of contract with these entities, doing something in exchange for something else or for some type of knowledge. So it's not all fun and games. It's very dark. It's a very, very dark place, even though it seems the way people report it, the euphoria, right? So just because people report the euphoria and these good experiences, we're talking too much, man. I think we should just wrap this up, SubhanAllah. Is there anything you want to wrap up with?
No, that's it, man. I think we said it all. But Jazakallah khair for having me on, and hopefully we made it clear to everyone.
It was my pleasure, man. I think definitely we can make other videos on this in the future. I'm pretty sure some people are going to have questions, but yeah, if you know someone that's taking this drug, man, please share this video with them. If you yourself are taking it, again, like we want you to not be a slave to these entities or to these beliefs that entities give you, and we want you to be free basically from that type of slavery, which is one of the worst forms of oppression and slavery. And we're hoping that this video affected you in some way, with the permission of Allah, of course, to steer you away from that world in that direction, because it's not a good one. And that's basically why we're sharing this video with you, hoping you guys can benefit. ladies and gentlemen. And if you have any questions, just I'll leave it in comments below. And also, if people want to contact you, brother, how would they do so? What's the best way to reach out to you?
So they can do so, inshallah, for now for YouTube. So I'll be in the comments. So leave any questions you have below. Inshallah, I'll respond to them if I can, and if not, we can make a video, and then maybe I'll post something on my account as well in the
Okay.
future, inshallah.
Sounds good, man. Sounds good. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.